Well, hello there, and welcome to day 22 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today I watched Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. The first in the John le Carre Smiley series, an adaptation of the first, starring Gary Oldman, John Firth, John Hurt, Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Hardy, just a whole plethora of famous faces. One of those sort of almost like a throwback film where it's a sort of Cold War thriller filled with sort of the best and brightest of British white male cinema. Because this is a very sort of male centric film, I must say, but I will say I did enjoy some of it. I've never read a Smiley, so this is not something I'm particularly familiar with. I remember at the time, vividly when it came out, being really excited to see it. I don't know why specifically, but I seem to remember making the really foolish mistake of seeing it in Asda, buying it, and then realising it's the Alec Guinness version because it was still in the cinema. And I don't know why, and that was a very, very stupid thing to do, but, clearly the idea of Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy was just really something I was quite keen on. So there's not really a great deal to say about sort of it is what you might call your very archetypical conspiracy thriller. It's a lot of people sitting in rooms discussing plot in a very novel kind of way. You can really see how this sort of would make a very intriguing and intense novel, and it's adapted well, but it really is a series of very standard conversations, in very sort of dark rooms between sort of conspiratorial people with the tiniest smidge of action just to kind of illustrate. And I did enjoy it. For the most part, I think Gary Oldman has this real charismatic way about him, and I really do wish he'd sort of continued making more sequels to this, because I would have happily seen this sort of charismatic, quiet man going about his business, being a spy. So, just to sort of summarise the plot, it's so George Smiley is an MI6 or former MI6 agent who, at the beginning of the film, set in 1974, or 1973, sorry, the controller, who is the head of their agency, essentially gets another agent, sends him on assignment because they suspect that someone high in British government is in fact a Russian mole. As a consequence of this agent is sent to Budapest, where he is seemingly killed, and the whole operation falls apart, resulting in Controller, played by John Hurt, and Smiley to be let go from the business. And then a year later, other evidence comes together suggesting that that this conspiracy might have more grounds to it, and so Toby Jones who's sort of taken over as the new controller, basically recruits Smiley to come in as an outsider and try to catch whoever the mole is. And that's really it, really. That's the sort of base of it. As I say, it's got this real like changing of the guard in respect of the fact that you have, John Hurt, who was at this point sort of the old keeper of sort of performance of that kind. You have your sort of older men like Mark Strong, Gary Oldman, Colin Firth, who were about to step into John Hurt's sort of generation of being an older statesman of performance, and then almost doing like a handover to younger people like Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hardy, who had both of whom just started to come into the real prominent parts of their career, with of course Benedict Cumberbatch going on to, well, having just appeared in the first series of Sherlock, Tom Hardy having appeared in Inception, and then of course both going on to have huge spanning careers. As I say, it does lack something of sort of any kind of diversity. I think there's 1-2 female characters in it, and and it's very much that. I don't know. There's something funny about it, really. I suppose from sort of the age that we're coming from, where we have such a plethora of diverse actors. Sort of all of our British sort of cream of the crop are still representing a much broader palette of what you might call modern Britain, whereas this very much is centred around what you might call the Olivier kind of sort of not generation, that's not the right word, oeuvre of, these sort of elder men and younger-ish men, and they come from sort of theatrical backgrounds, and it's quite a nice sort of acknowledgement of, the ability of these sort of men. Broadly, the thing that I kept thinking about was James Bond. And I know that almost feels like a strange cheating to be thinking about James Bond while I'm watching Smiley, but I was thinking about Daniel Craig's Bond and sort of the evolution of Bond in the modern era, because there's a real problem that we're having and are going to continue to have. And I've talked a lot about this with a friend of mine, about how James Bond is really struggling in the modern age because his kind of character becomes more and more out of place in the modern world, and his kind of spy becomes more and more out of place in the modern world if you stick to the more traditional close novel interpretation of the character, because that kind of spy just doesn't, he is, as people have said for eons, he is this sort of misogynistic, xenophobic, alcoholic sociopath, basically, and it's harder and harder to sympathise and relate to him, whilst he does things that are increasingly troublesome in the modern era. Daniel Craig's Bond really tried to sort of find a new way to sort of modernise the character. Initially, the feeling is that they thought they were making him into Bourne. So you sort of start with like Casino Royale, which has a much more Bourne style to it, and Quantum of Solace, which has a very kind of Bourne-esque feeling towards it. Probably more so even. But what I think they came to realise, though there are elements of that, and of course in sort of action directing really lent towards that going forwards, I think in terms of the personality and character of James Bond, they realised after this that he really is more like Smiley. If you look at Skyfall and Spectre, it's very much about an older man who's growing increasingly out of place in modern spydom, and really, he's approaching the assignments he's given more increasingly as an outsider, and with a slightly sort of bitter, resentful edge to him. And I think that really suits the character as he exists now, especially with Daniel Craig, and that really suits the best way to have James Bond in the modern era. I mean, No Time to Die, which of course was supposed to come out last year and is supposedly coming out this year, is supposed to tie off that, although it's supposed to have more of a, by the looks of the trailer, less Timothy Dalton, probably more Roger Moore-ish, more sort of eccentric potentially, and maybe even throwing back to Sean Connery with sort of references to, of course, Blofeld and the hints of another villain from an early James Bond. And that kind of slightly silly but also kind of serious style to it. But like I say, Daniel Craig is very much the smiley Bond. Where that goes after this, who knows? Maybe Kingsman will have that's always my thinking, that maybe the Kingsman style would have a massive influence, but even Kingsman itself has struggled with with the genre, so it's really hard to say where they'll go from there. But that was mainly the thinking I was having whilst watching the Smiley, watching Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, was how this definitely influenced James Bond going forwards. It's funny, really. The thing that I always remember most about this is Mark Commode of Wittertainment, of Mark Commode and Simon Mayo's film review, always said how this film is not about spying. It's about growing old and sort of the passing, sort of growing increasingly out of touch with the modern age, and I think that's sort of what it really is about, and I think that's why perhaps they didn't make any more, because it really is about the swan song of old spydom. But those are the sorts of thoughts I was having through this. As I said, it didn't massively keep my attention as firmly as some of the other films I've watched in this, so sorry if I've sort of veered a lot more, but hopefully I've sort of filled it with other tidbits. Anyway, I'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks. Take care.